There once was a time, not so long ago, when you could be ridiculed, humiliated, lose your career, family, friends, even end up in a psychiatric hospital if you were to report seeing a UFO in the sky. Well, thankfully, things are a little different these days. Thanks to the Tic Tac video, the redefinition of UFO to UAP, and the congressional hearings, people can now discuss the matter more openly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to our witnesses who are testifying today. I want to thank each of you for being here to discuss a topic of grave importance to our national security. Earlier this year, a Chinese spy balloon was shot down off the coast of my home state of South Carolina. Since the Roswell incident in 1947, many Americans have wondered about the dangers of unknown objects crisscrossing our skies. Whether these are UAPs or weather phenomena, advanced technology from American allied or enemy forces, or something more out of this world. So my first question, I have several questions, and if we can just be quick on these first two, I'm going to ask each of you the same question, and then I'll get to each of you individually. The first one, when you reported your experiences with a UAP, did any of you face any repercussions with your superiors, yes or no?
No.
No. I've actually never seen anything personally, believe it or not. So.
All right. And then do you believe there's an active disinformation campaign within our government to deny existence of UAPs, yes or no?
I don't have an answer to that.
As previously stated publicly, yes.
I think previously with like Project Blue Book, yes, but currently I don't speak for the United States government.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions for Mr. Graves. What percentage of UAP sightings, in your belief, go unreported by our pilots?
This is an approximation based off of my personal experience speaking with a number of pilots, but I would estimate we're somewhere near 5% reporting, perhaps.
So like 95% basically don't report seeing UAPs?
That's just my personal estimate.
In the incident off Virginia Beach, do you believe the Navy took the danger to your aircraft seriously after it was reported?
Absolutely.
A few questions for Mr. Favor. As an expert naval aviator, have you ever seen an object that looked and moved like the Tic Tac UAP?
No.
Did the Tic Tac UAP move in such a way that defied the laws of physics?
The way we understand them, yes.
Many dismiss UAP reports as classified weapons testing by our own government, but in your experience as a pilot, does our government typically test advanced weapon systems right next to multi-million-dollar jets without informing our pilots?
No, we have test ranges for that.
Recent revelations by whistleblower David Cruz suggest that the US military had recovered crashed spacecraft and were back engineering the technology. And this is something that was suggested in the 1990s by then whistleblower Bob Lazar.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin, and they're basically being dismantled. Some are, well, in various stages of completion, built from other parts, and they're being test flown and basically just analyzed.
Seeing a UFO or a UAP is one thing, but to actually have contact with the occupants is something else. The first and most famous recorded case of alleged alien abduction was that of Betty and Barney Hill. Their encounter on a rural New Hampshire road in 1961 opened the floodgates as other victims came forward over the following decades. But it's not just an American phenomenon. There are similar incidents happening daily on every continent, including the United Kingdom. Perhaps the most famous case of an alleged alien abduction in the UK is that of Police Constable Alan Godfrey, a serving officer with West Yorkshire Police who encountered a UFO and its occupants whilst on duty one evening in 1980, in what became known as the Todmorden UFO incident.
The Todmorden incident was fascinating, and there's lots of behind-the-scenes things that people don't really realise. It started with Zygmunt Adamski. He went missing in June of 1980. He lived in Tingler. And 5 days later, he was found on top of a coal heap in Todmorden, fresh suit, white shirt, clean shaven, no coal on him, a number of burns and a strange substance that is not known to man. The actual police officer who attended that was Alan Godfrey. He was the first man on the scene. 6 months later, he's on duty on a very rainy night, and a farmer has reported an entire flock of cows has just gone missing. In seconds, it's gone. He's driving down the road, he sees a white light in the sky, and the next thing he remembers, he's coming to about 25 minutes later, and the missing cows were in the field at the side of the car. And even though it was raining heavily, the spot where his car had been was completely dry.
I was out in a police car one night and 6 of my colleagues had seen this UFO buzzing around the Tommerden Valley. And I actually came across it blocking the main trunk road through Tommerden.
Like most people, I've been quite interested in the Alan Godfrey case, the Tommerden UFO incident, and I've listened to interviews that Alan's done over the years and also read his book. I think the guy's very credible. I certainly believe that what he says he believes happened, and I've got no reason to disbelieve that. I think it's interesting that he was involved in the case of Zygmunt Adamski. I believe it was about a week or so, maybe a couple of weeks before. He had his own experience at Tommerden. I think it's quite interesting that he was involved in that. Obviously that's quite a perplexing case, the way that the body was found, the way that the body was clothed, the marks on the body, the fact that he had sort of disappeared for about 3 or 4 days. The way that the body was, to put it not too mildly, clean. He wasn't full of coal dust. It wasn't as if there was any evidence that he'd actually climbed up to the top of the coal pile and then unfortunately maybe had a heart attack or something like that and then died. It was as if his body had been dropped onto the top of the coal pile, which I find really interesting.
What was strange about the guy was he was wearing a top coat, but he wasn't wearing a shirt. He was wearing a string vest, you know. His jacket had been fastened unevenly at the top here. His trousers and the fly was undone on the trousers. His shoes appeared that he hadn't put them on himself. They hadn't been tied properly.
The marks around his cranium as well, I think, were quite startling. And it's just interesting that Alan was involved in that, and then a couple of weeks later he had his own experience. And of course he's lost time under aggression. He has said that he was taken inside the craft and experimented upon.
I don't really understand how it works, whether it's kind of like a trauma thing and he suppressed it himself, or whether whatever the entity, the alien, whatever, kind of wiped his memory or something like that.
It's something that stayed with him ever since, and I believe that it caused problems for him with his career. The police were quite scathing of what he was claiming, and he was ridiculed.
I think sometimes when people are abducted, their memories are removed. They don't want you to come down and say, this has just happened to me. It's another way of ridiculing you, making you look silly.
It's obviously an incident which was greatly influential on Alan, and it's obviously stayed with him for the rest of his life.
That one report for me led to a gentleman who was in the same area, 2016, walking his dog. Gaddings Dam, about 12 o'clock at night. He came to half an hour later down the road. He said he has no memory of what happened to him, but he had a spherical ball in his neck that's still there to this day, and he has no understanding of why.
There are BAE systems at Samlesbury and also at Wharton, both of which develop new technologies. Again, one of the theories that I think is quite plausible is that these facilities are being watched. Now, whether they're being watched by aliens or whether they're being watched by craft which are technologically advanced from other countries, that will be open to speculation. But there's certainly, for instance, they developed the Eurofighter there, so there was a lot of new technology which was incorporated in that, both engine-wise and you know, the performance of these craft. So there is quite a high level of research and development done at British Aerospace, and I do believe that they are being watched, shall we say, or you know, to keep an eye on the technology that's being produced there.
I also believe, and it's a big ask for some I know, that below Todmorden and Winter Hill and the Brecon Beacons there are underground bases. We have cryptid reports on them, paranormal reports, abductions, creature reports, as in a dogman or a werewolf. And this seems to happen wherever we have these supposed underground bases. And we have to touch on the missing people. There are lots and lots of people who go missing in these areas, lots of animal mutilations, and we just don't have a reasoning for why.
In the town of Bedford, near London, lived the Kinsella twins, Ronald and Philip, identical twins, who both report being abducted by unknown entities on several occasions. We sat down and spoke with them, and their recollections are both compelling and terrifying in equal measure, as you're about to hear.
Yeah, I got involved with ufology, namely because of an experience I had back in the winter of 1989. And it was something that was truly bizarre and still to this day I can't work out. And it was what is termed as an alien abduction. And on this night in the winter, I'd come back home from work. It was roughly about 7:15 at night. Got up to the driveway of the house and walked in. And as I normally do, go through to the hall and get into the kitchen. And I leaned behind on one of the counters, just looking out into the open kitchen door through to the hall and the frosted glass windows that leads out to the driveway. And my brother is standing in front of me in the dining area, so he hasn't got any view of the hall. And my sister is to my far left, and our mum was out at work, working late. And all of a sudden the atmosphere started to change. It started to become very electrified. And you know when you get that feeling when you got the hairs on your body starting to stand on end? And the dog started to react to this. He seemed to be concerned with something that was occurring out into the hall. And then Ronnie here went into what I can only describe as a trance. He raised his head to the ceiling and he said, and I can still remember the very words he spoke, "There's going to be an earthquake and Grandma's going to die." Well, at that point there was no earthquake and our maternal grandmother was still very much alive at that point. And as this strange energy started to build up, there came this light very quickly up to the frosted glass doors to the house, the front of the house. And I thought that our mum had driven up, early from work and finished, and it was the lights to the car. But the lights increased in intensity, and incredibly, the only way I could describe it was that the door to the front of the house the glass was starting to move backwards and forwards. And at this moment, the dog is really going crazy. My brother's still frozen in his strange stance. And this light that I could see, this small being, it was about 3 foot in height. It was clad entirely in black. It was very diminutive in size, but it had what I thought first of all was a large black motorcycle helmet on his head. That is to say that the cranium was much bigger than in proportion to the body, and it came through the glass of the door, and it immediately ran forward into what was then my brother's and my study and bedroom. The light disappeared that came forward, and then my brother came out of his trance, and I said, "There's an intruder in the house," and it was as everything suddenly awoke, and then I shouted, "There's an intruder in the house," and I grabbed a big knife. And this thing, whatever it was, I saw it run from where it disappeared across the hall and up the stairs. We searched the house, nothing could be found of it. And then the early hours of that morning, events truly bizarre began to take shape, where I would find myself on my back and floating 3 feet off the floor in the hall and directly the area of where this thing had originally come through. And it's as though I'm being pulled out of the house on my back through the glass doors to the kitchen, and I'm thinking this is impossible. I'm awake, I'm fully conscious, I can't move, but there is some force that's got hold of me and it's pulling me through solid material. Well, this pulling sensation continued as I was taking through to the kitchen, and then amazed to find myself going through the doors to the conservatory and then out into the garden and being slingshotted up so I could see the sky, the dark sky, and there were all these lights, and I assumed they were UFOs, and I'm thinking, well, they're real, they're here. And there's one object that isn't moving, and it's a spherical dark grey object. It doesn't have any lights on it, but as soon as I look at it, as soon as I take hold of what this thing is, I feel myself being pulled up very quickly towards it. It's rather like a feeling when you're on a roller coaster and you're just about to take that dip. My stomach was rolling, and as I got closer and closer to it, I then blanked out. And the next phase was that I found myself in this, what I can only describe as like a medical room, it was very dark. There was some light directly to my front and to the left, and I found myself embarrassingly being laid on this bed. I was naked and strapped to the bed. I remember it was hot, very hot. There were some fixtures to my right, and everything seemed like it was connected, like all plastic mold, some kind of mold. But I was horrified at this point to discover that to my immediate right there were what I can only describe as 3 tall, bulky reptilians. Now, I had no understanding of reptilians, I had no understanding of abductions at this point, and I screamed because when I saw them, they were impassive, they didn't seem to have any empathy, and I realized at that point, when I'd clocked them, that there was a foreign implement that had been inserted to the lower part of the anatomy, and it felt organic coming from within the bowel or stomach region, and it felt alive. And at this point, my mind's about to explode because I'm like, where the hell am I? What on earth is going on? What is inside me? I want it out, and what are they? And then I started to yell and scream, and at that point, these 3 beings to my right had gone. I don't know where they'd gone to, but there was what I can only describe as a small grey. It wasn't grey in colour, it was more of like a cream. And it appeared from that corner that I could see where the light was coming from. The straps were released, and this device, or whatever it was, I felt it being retracted, and not by anything, it seemed mechanical. And the grey approached me and asked me to dress, and I put my night clothes on, and I was ordered to follow it because I wanted to get out through to this area that it had come through that was a corridor. And the last part was even more bizarre in nature. As we go through this corridor that's quite well lit, we come to what I thought was a wall, but it actually was a door because it disappeared, and the grey's looking at me as if to say, get out. And I'm like, I can see the village from a height. I can see our conservatory, and I can also see a smaller disc laying where our conservatory is. And I'm like, you want me to go? You just want me to jump out? And I felt this push. And as I was coming down towards the garden, there were 2 greys with me, one on my right, one on my left, and I almost like I was told not to look at them. And I thought that was very strange because I'd seen one anyway up there. And as I came down to the garden, what I was presented with then was the last grey that I recall very clearly. The other 2 had gone. I think they had left, and I was really angry because I'm like, well, you know, how on earth did you get me through solid matter, and what on earth were you doing with me? And there was this grey in front of me, and this other craft was above him. It seemed much smaller to the one I'd seen before. But this grey was very interesting because it was about 4 foot in height. It was quite well built. It was not as diminutive as the others I'd seen. But I will say to you that it wore this pointed hat, ridiculous pointed hat, but it looked quite smart as it came around its head. It wore a one-piece uniform, khaki uniform. It had knee-length boots. Its face came to a point and it had large black eyes. And it had its arms folded across its chest, and it looked really angry. And I thought, you're angry with me? I wanted to punch this thing. I really wanted to punch it, but I couldn't move because I felt so violated by what had happened, even though I couldn't understand what had occurred. So I think to myself, when I need to ask him a question, if he can answer it, then I know that the phenomena was real. And I said, how the hell am I able to get through solid matter? How is that possible? And all of a sudden, he looked shocked. I remembered seeing his face kind of like frozen in shock. His mouth went into an O, and immediately he started to lift his head up very slowly to the underneath his craft, and he started to rasp this unintelligible language that sounded like the voice synthesizer to a ZX81 that we used to have years ago. And as he remained frozen there, I remembered coming through the glass very quickly, almost like crashing through it, and seeing him frozen, and then through to the hall, and then bang into my body, so that when I woke up, I immediately had a nosebleed, and I had to go to the bathroom to sort myself out. In the morning, we found with the instant developing Polaroid cameras that we tried to take pictures of, but nothing came out. It wouldn't develop. 3 triangular marks behind my right ear, 3 marks on my right arm. I had profuse nosebleeds for about 2 years. The doctors were going to cauterize them, and I had problems with my right ear for many years. And this then led me to look into the abduction hypothesis, because I was thinking, was this a dream? How was I left with physical marks? How were they able to take me from my body? And Pierre Sebak, another researcher who does a lot of research into the old cultures, discovered that what this being I call Noddy, the last one that raised his head up to the craft and was scrambling this strange language, he was mimicking what my brother had done earlier that evening when he went into a trance and said there's going to be an earthquake or grandma's going to die. So I realized at that point that we were dealing with a phenomena that was far more complex than people saying, oh, the abduction happens on a physical level of reality. And it was at this point when I started to really look into the research, and in 1996 I came out with a theoretical model surrounding the abduction phenomena and about what the grays could represent. So that's primarily how I got involved in it, and still even to this day we have no answers.
That is especially in UFO type cases, and UFO is a very weird term because a UFO is literally an unidentified flying object. Now we're talking about people who are taken aboard craft. They used to call them abductions. Now they're calling people who go through this experiencers. Some people have very negative experiences. Some have, maybe it starts off negative, but over time they come to an understanding and realize it's not so negative, because you could take your dog to the vet, he's scared to death, and it's a negative experience for him, but you know that what they're doing for your dog is positive. It's trying to help him. Dog doesn't understand that. Same thing with people who sometimes get abducted. People who have these abduction experiences tend to have an increase in psychic abilities afterwards. The Kinsellas are an example.
I have an encounter of my own that set this entire thing off. It's very brief. My interest in the UFO topic began in a horrendous manner because I was 13. It was in 1982. I was ashamed to actually come out with it. It was very derogative, not in a medical manner, but in the way in which it was done. And I didn't know about abductions then. I had no idea about the alien paradox. I wasn't even interested in it. I loved Doctor Who. As a kid I loved Doctor Who and Blake 7 and all that, the 80s. But in a nutshell, basically, we lived in Luton, up a road called Hazelbury Crescent, old Victorian houses. Phil and I shared a room. It was quite big. I didn't mean to say you were rich, but it's just what we had. It was one night near winter. I don't exactly know the date, because as a kid I didn't keep a diary, and it was to be forgotten, probably sensibly so. I was taken from my bed at night, and I went through the loft, right into the sky. It sounds bizarre and crazy, I know, but it happened. It wasn't a dream or sleep paralysis. I could see something very dark in the sky, hanging there. I couldn't discern the shape. I've tried and I can't discern it. It was massive. I went into this thing, and I found myself in this kind of, again, medical environment. I wouldn't say it was a hospital, it just had this kind of medical feel, and I was in this wheelchair. I think it was white, it was a very modern wheelchair. And I do remember that the room was quite curved this end, but as for the specific details I cannot remember. but there were 3 men standing ahead of me, but they weren't right. They were like armoured. But to me, I guess I projected as doctors because of the environmental feel. And I knew there was one behind me. Now, being shocked, being thrust into this very bizarre situation, I got the impression of authority. The one behind me, there was one, I was right, spoke, and I will never forget the line he used. "We are going to perform an operation on you, Ronald." And that's what really shocked me. He knew my name. Now, this voice was not reverberating. I don't know if it came from his mouth, whether it was telepathic. I don't know, because they were armoured. Certainly the 3 ahead of me were armoured. Rather like gas masks, but very ultra-modern outfit, radioactive, some kind of uniform. I couldn't quite discern. Science fiction. To me, it looked very spacey. And I remember I was horrified at this suggestion of an operation. I couldn't see him. It's as if I was paralysed. Now, when I say paralysis, it's not as if I was bound. I just had no urge, strangely, the compulsion to turn and see him. It's as if I wasn't meant to see him, but I could see the 3 ahead. They were quiet. They were just standing there, like humanoid, like men. I pleaded with him. I begged him. I do not want this operation. Now, they didn't tell me what it was to do with, but I got the impression it was to do with the head, neurological kind of thing. I don't know why. And it was so real because he argued with me very politely. Authority. No, it has to be done.
Many people listening to these accounts would probably dismiss them as mere flights of fancy. But when you meet the abductees and discover that they are genuine and telling the truth, you realise that these victims have to somehow come to terms with what has happened to them and learn to live with these traumatic memories for the rest of their lives.
The question is, what exactly are they? And have we been fed a lie, or are we deluded by it? Is this something based on our own consciousness, personal contact, or is the force that is replicating what is in vogue and infiltrating us in that manner? We don't know. But it moved on from then, this research from the 25 years, looking even to the future with the Greys kidnapping people and taking them on board their ships, and then explaining their concerns for the environmental issues, when it's quite clear they've done absolutely nothing at all. Nothing. And so it will go on, and I sometimes wonder with them, being alleged aliens, what their actual agenda is, because to me, personally, it seems like an illusion. We're being duped, to put it finely, into believing they're from outer space when it could be something completely different. An example for you as well is this abduction hypothesis of people being taken. If they're so advanced, they can create amnesia. Apparently people do have amnesia. Well, why won't they implement this prior to a snatching? It would save all the bother. The point is as if they want you to see them, and that is key to this issue. They want you to see them. So why do they want you to see them? Is it to express his concerns that on our behalf is considered mute? Or is it because they feed off something from us? Is it fear, anticipation, something they gain from it? We don't know.
Well, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe, and if you'd like to join in the debate, feel free to leave a comment below. Until next time, I'm Roy BASNETT, and this has been our Unexplained World.